I used to think that monsters were imaginary creatures made up to scare little kids. You know, to keep them in line, make them behave even when mom and dad weren't watching. Like the boogeyman. Even when rumors started circulating through our little rural community about vampires living up in Dark Hollow. Really? What adult in their right mind would believe in vampires? My name is Frankie Evans. I'm a 13-year veteran on the police force in Irwin, Tennessee, and I attest that I'm a sound mind and body. And I'm here to tell you that vampires do exist. Now, Dark Hollow is one of those backwoods, out-of-the-way places where nobody likes to go alone. Not even cops. It's miles back into the mountain after crossing a stream where you risk stalling out your car if you don't have four-wheel drive that's high enough off the ground. The people that live back there, well, they're not the friendliest sort, I can tell you that. Back in the day, Dark Hollow was full of moonshiners. Later, it was people with illegal agendas, such as making drugs and running guns across the state line into North Carolina. By the time I became a cop in Irwin, all of that had sort of fizzled out, and there were only 3 inhabited homes left in Dark Hollow. One big family, 3 houses, quiet and peaceful for 12 years. No reason for me to go there. No reason for any of us cops to go there. And then, in the middle of last summer, some hiker from Maine goes missing on the Appalachian Trail back that way. His GPS last recorded him as being right in the middle of Dark Hollow. And the AT is quite a bit of ways off from Dark Hollow. And the best we could figure was that he became disoriented and his phone's GPS lost signal. After that, well, it's anybody's guess. There are bears, coyotes, a few timber wolves, and mountain lions all over the place back there. And we never found the body. A few weeks later, 2 more hikers disappeared within a mile of where the first had gone missing. And there was a widespread search effort for them that turned up nothing. The search continued for 2 weeks, and every foot of that place was searched by the time we stopped. 4 miles from the edge of Dark Hollow is the township of Unicoi. It's quiet, stereotypical southern farming community for the most part. Neighbors are divided by acres and acres of fields or mountains or creeks and roads, but everybody knows everyone else. There are no strangers there. And so, when a heavy-set man came stumbling right up the main road, babbling all sorts of nonsense and gibberish, the whole town knew about him before nightfall. I picked him up from Norma Jones' house that day. He was a balding man in his 40s. His eye seemed about to pop out of his head, and he was covered in sweat and smelled as if he had rolled around someone's pig pen a few times. His clothes were stiff with dried filth. He didn't struggle as I put him in my cruiser. As I drove him to the station, he babbled incoherently, charging him with public drunkenness. We booked him and got him into a cell without much trouble. But the man didn't understand why he was there. I don't think he knew much of anything. From his clothing, we knew he wasn't a hiker. More likely he was a businessman. No hits on his fingerprints and no identification on him. We were left scratching our heads. He had to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or at least that's what we thought at the time. The other cells on his block were empty, and I was glad. One rowdy inmate could set off the entire jail in no time flat, and then we would have all of them babbling and yelling, just imitating the guy in the drunk tank. The sheriff brought in the doctor to examine the man, and he found 2 puncture marks on his throat, just below the collar of his ruined button-down shirt. The sheriff, thankfully, put a lid on the findings right then and there. We didn't need that information getting out and going around, especially since there were still 3 missing hikers. The next morning, the man in the drunk tank was dead. He had chewed off his fingers of his right hand. There had been no screaming to alert the guards. The doctor put accidental choking as his official cause of death. He was labeled John Doe and stored in the county morgue. That evening, just after dark, a frantic teenager called in and said he and 3 of his buddies had been walking out of Dark Hollow and were attacked by vampires. Now, thinking at first it was a hoax, the dispatcher scolded the kid and hung up. Seconds later, the kid called back. It sounded like he was running. The dispatcher put it on speaker. We could all hear the genuine terror in that kid's voice. He said he was at the first house in Dark Hollow, and then there was a blood-curdling scream. Then, the sound of something heavy being dragged through high grass. "Frankie, you and Charlie are up. Go find that kid. If it's just some teenagers messing around, haul them in, and we'll give them a good scare." Charlie Walker had been my partner for the last 10 years. He's a good man, smart, brave, strong. He's got a level head when it comes to highly emotional situations. He looked at me across the hood of the cruiser. He didn't want to go to Dark Hollow that night. He didn't have to say it. It was written all over his face. I didn't want to go either, but those kids might be in real trouble. Not from vampires. I didn't believe in them. Most likely a rowdy group of Buddy Tipton kids just out for the night of raising hell. Or, worst case scenario, a bear or a mountain lion attacked them. Crossing the creek at a crawl in the cruiser, I made sure to drive over the grates that had been put under the water years ago, so I wouldn't bottom out on the rocks. Dark Hollow was aptly named. There were no streetlights, and no ambient light from town reached so far back in the woods. It was so dark that you literally couldn't see your hand if it was inches from your face. The moon was hidden behind a thick wall of clouds, so there was only our headlights and our spotlight, which I used to scour the tree lines on either side of the road. One curve away from the first house sat a big black pickup full of camping gear. It belonged to Richie Sparks' boy, Randy. We got back into the cruiser and went to the road in front of the first house, Buddy Tipton's house. He was the patriarch of the Tipton family, still lived back there. A grouchy old man. There was a single light burning in the kitchen, but no movement, and I hit the place with my spotlight. No one was outside, but I could see trampled grass near the edge of the yard. The grass was at least waist high there. Charlie found a backpack. Its contents had been scattered over several feet, as if the kid lost the stuff out of it while he was fleeing. And then I found the blood. There was a lot of blood, so much that it was unlikely that the kid survived. I radioed for backup, and Charlie went back to the cruiser. "Hey Frankie, here." I was shocked when he handed me a machete. I looked at it, dumbfounded, turning it in my hand. For their heads, I'm telling you, the vampire stories are true. My dad used to scare us with those stories, and he always said that they were true. That's why there's only one family left up here. They're all vampires. Now, I wanted to scoff at him and toss down the blade, but something about Charlie's calm attitude toward the situation made me keep it. And that was the first time I gave any serious consideration to the vampire stories. Charlie is one of the sanest people I know, and if he believed, well then, just maybe there was some truth there. We followed the trail of blood through the grass, past Buddy's house and then past his son's house. The trail became harder to follow when it crossed the dirt and gravel road farther up the hill, but the drag marks led us straight to Billy Jack Tipton's house. He was the youngest of Billy's sons. I radioed our backup to let them know the first two houses were unchecked. We didn't see movement at either side of them, but it's better safe than sorry. I used the butt of my mag light to knock on Billy Jack's door. It didn't surprise us that there was no answer. It was unlocked, so we entered, flipping on the lights and announcing, "Irwin PD, police officers, is anyone there?" And our voices echoed in the emptiness. No pictures hung on the walls, and there was scarcely any furniture and no cook stove in the oven. The place was draped with thick cobwebs as if the house had been vacant for a long time, maybe years. The smell was dreadful. It was the stench of long dead animals rotting away quietly in the shadows. Charlie whistled. He pointed at the basement door standing open. As we neared, a musty, damp odor mixed with earth rose to greet us. There was a slight breeze from down there. I mentioned for Charlie to go first, and we searched the basement. We found a tunnel big enough to walk through, hunched over. Charlie stopped a few yards into it and tapped his machete. I had mine in hand. He nodded. Whispering, he warned, "Guns won't do any good. Be alert and don't let them bite you. Remember, take off the head." At that point, I just nodded. I was trained to use my gun for defense, not a machete. I felt like we had walked a mile when we heard movement ahead. The twists and turns in the tunnel made it impossible to tell where we might come out. Charlie stopped, and I moved up beside him. We turned our lights off. The darkness was thick. The smell that drifted to us was the same stench that had covered the John Doe who was currently in the county morgue. It was much stronger in the tunnel. We eased forward carefully. Ambient light from a fire threw a dim orange glow, and I could see an enormous cave. The noises came from the other side of it, just behind an outcropping of rocks. And near the fire lay two boys that looked to be about 17 years old. They were tied and had duct tape over their mouths. They didn't notice us as we sneaked in and edged close to where the noises were. The sounds of many animals lapping water and tearing flesh unnerved me. Animals had not tied these boys or built that fire. I admired Charlie's ability to push forward without the slightest hint of fear, because I was terrified. 6 figures surrounded a large flat rock that was about 3 feet tall. They were leaned over a bloody mess, slurping and chomping at whatever was on that stone slab. My gut rolled as it came into view. The face was still intact. It was Richie Sparks' son, Randy. The kid had just turned 18 a few weeks back. Buddy Tipton, or whatever Buddy had become, turned to us. The others followed his gaze, and we were pinned in place by 6 sets of glowing green eyes. They had long fangs that protruded to their chins. Their mouths were covered with blood and pieces of Randy. What little hair was left on their heads was in patches, resembling an animal with a bad case of mange. Buddy and his wife Jean were the obvious leaders. The others looked to them, awaiting the command to kill the 2 intruders, and Buddy stepped forward. His nose no longer existed. It was just an opening in the center of his face. His hands hung far too low on his legs, and the fingers had become elongated, ending in gore-drenched talons. It seemed like eons passed as we stood there gawking at each other. Then Buddy leaned forward, and a long howling screech emanated from him. That was the signal the others had been awaiting. Apparently, because Billy Jack and his wife, and Topher and his wife, all ran at us. Charlie screamed, "The heads, Frankie!" He sidestepped both women and swung the machete at Billy Jack, taking his head in one cut. The women descended toward me, screeching and covered with viscera. I'd never used a machete, except to clear laurel limbs from a hunting path when I was a teenager. I swung wildly, taking off an arm of one and then a hand on the other. And out of pure instinct, I drew my gun and unloaded it into them. Still, they rushed at me. My back was against the wall, and there was nowhere left to run. I hit one in the neck, not severing the head completely, and it rolled to one side, resting on her shoulders as she continued her attack. I kicked the other woman away and she clawed my arm, unzipping the tissue all the way to the bone. I dropped my gun and pushed forward, swinging the blade with better aim. I sliced through that horribly lolling head, and the body dropped, fingers still clutching at the air. The second woman nearly bit my shoulder, but I ran the blade through her face and then yanked it out. Her fanged maw hung wide and she rushed me again, screaming louder. I took one step back and poised, as if to hit a home run. Her head rolled to a stop by the other one. I ran to assist Charlie, but he had already killed Buddy and his wife and their son Topher. Billy Jack had lost an arm at the elbow and had a gaping wound across his chest, but he was still fighting. He looked up, those glowing green eyes piercing to my soul, and I stopped. Charlie lunged forward, and Billy Jack leaped up and back onto a high ledge of rock. We couldn't hope to reach him. The sounds of running feet came from the tunnel, flashlight beams bouncing and bobbed wildly. It was our backup. They filled into the cave, gasping and gagging at the carnage. Billy Jack used the commotion to his advantage and jumped from the ledge to the ground behind me. It was a leap of at least 25 feet that no normal person could have made. He bounded into the shadows with Charlie in pursuit. I took off after them. Billy Jack had gone into a hidden tunnel, and only a dozen feet inside, we began to see other tunnels branching off in both directions. There was no hope of finding him. Sadly, Randy and his friend Bobby lost their lives that day. The other two boys recovered physically, but they'll never be the same mentally. Truth be told, neither will I. I retired after that, and most people retire to a nice quiet country home to relax their way through retirement, but not me. I now live on one of the busiest streets in New York City. I think I'll stay right where I am. I've had enough of the quiet country living to last me a lifetime.